Hey, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. Well, today I'm super excited to talk about the Splenic Authority, the next authority in our authority series. Now, today we're going to be talking to the amazing Jenna Rossi. Hey, Jenna.
Hi, Emma.
Most of you might already know Jenna from one of the manifesting with the what was it, manifesting miracles with a projector or something like that, some title like that. So you guys have heard from Jenna before, and I also just want to let the members of HDX, my Human Design Experience, I want you guys to know that we're starting at the end of October, the authority panels within the membership, which is going to be super cool. So we'll have each type with each authority so we can have a massive discussion, just like the type panels, which was super fun. But here on the podcast, I want to make sure nobody misses out and that they all get a chance to really dive deep into what these authority things are in real life. As you guys know, one of my bugbears is that there are way too many people telling us what we should be doing with our human design or who we are because of our design. And I want to blow all that up. So all these series are really here to support you to answer the question, what is true for me? When we bring real life people and their experiences on type or authority into this place where we can have a discussion, I think it's so much more resourceful because you're going to hear about Jenna's journey to trust her spleen. Because let's be honest, we don't all get born and get told, okay, we have to trust our intuition or we have to trust our gut or we have to trust this or that. So I think it's just as valuable to talk about the journey that people go on to trust their authorities. So let's dive in. All right, let's start off. Splenic authority. In the hierarchy of authorities, we start with the solar plexus, then we have the sacral, and then we move to the splenic authority. Now, splenic authority is the one that we talk about. It's our instinct. It's spontaneous, it's quick. It's, one word that I really love to use, and I'm not sure it's exactly correct, so I'll explain myself, is that the spleen can also be nonsensical. And what that means is that sometimes it kind of guides you, and we're going to talk exactly how Jenna's spleen guides her in just a second, but it will guide you to things that don't make sense. So your logical mind, which remember, that isn't here to make decisions for you. So we want to choose to let go of the mind and get into our authority. The spleen, depending on how much you trust it, depending on how much you've built that muscle, it's going to take you kind of from, instead of the brain taking you from A to B to C to D, the spleen has the ability to give you these nonsensical guidances that are actually taking you like from A to M to Z. But you have to learn to trust it because it's in the moment. It's only going to tell you once. It's not like the sacral that's like on all the time telling you yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So there's a real there's an art to really listening to your spleen. And I see it with my husband, Justin, because he's a splenic authority as well. And it's taken him a long time. And he just started practicing with food because it talked to him really clearly with food, what was right to eat, what's correct for him and what wasn't. But let's kick off. So Jenna, when it comes to your splenic authority, when you first discovered that your authority was splenic, did that resonate with you? Was that kind of obvious, or were you like, wow, I don't know how to do this?
Yeah. And I want to respond immediately to the word art. I love that. I think that's the first time I heard that word. I don't know if you've said that before, but the fact that I don't think you have. I mean,
I don't think so, but I will now.
I'm pretty sure I've listened to everything you've shared on Splenic Authority, and I don't think you've ever said art. So I love that. It is an art. And I'm a creative being. So I'm like, yes, art. So I love that you said art because kind of when I was reflecting on my splenic authority before this discussion, I was kind of thinking of it's really about building a relationship with your spleen. That's kind of how I was thinking back on, you know, how I developed this connection to my spleen. It was really developing a relationship and kind of a friendship with my spleen. Thinking back on when I learned I had splenic authority to now, it really was a friendship. But it's also an art. And so when I first learned I had splenic authority, I love that you said Justin started with food, because I kind of wish I started with food. That sounds a lot easier. Because when I discovered human design, you know, I jumped right into working with you. I found human design, and then I hired you. And at the same time, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I kind of held back on that first episode that we had, because I was right in the middle of quitting my corporate job, or wanting to quit my corporate job. And I was nervous someone was going to hear this. So I'd kind of like to revisit the experience of my first kind of splenic hit, or the first message that I heard from my spleen, if you don't mind me kind of going into
please,
that
I've got
story. Because
goosebumps head to toe.
yeah, because Justin started with food, and I'm totally not dissing Justin, because that was probably the best way to go about this. So I wish I started with food, but my first message that kind of came through, and with my spleen, it's almost like when I'm dipping in, and that's the feeling of my spleen, is I'm dipping into my body. It's like this feeling of dipping in. So I'm going from my mind, where my mind is like word vomit. It's paragraphs. It's honestly word vomit. It's my mind is trying to explain things when I'm trying to get an answer to a question or a complication or a challenge in my life. My mind and my ego is just like word vomit. It's trying to explain its way through the situation. And I really have to just pause and dip into my spleen. And if it's a big issue in my life, it really just comes through like a little whisper of a message. And it never makes sense the first time I hear it. I'm usually like, what the fuck? What the hell does that mean? You know, I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what? It never makes sense. It never really helps me. It never tells me how, but it's usually just this little tiny message, this little phrase. And the first one that I got, it was the beginning of 2020. I was planning a wedding. I I hated my corporate job. I hated corporate. I had spent a year and a half in a job that, while I loved the people and I got a lot of recognition for something I didn't enjoy, I was, you know, quote unquote, moving up the ladder. I could have moved up the ladder if I wanted. I was doing well. I was successful. I was making money. You know, I was on the path. I was absolutely freaking miserable. And I was looking externally for any direction. I was hiring coaches, health coaches, life coaches. I hired you. No offense, you helped me a ton, but I was looking externally for anything to give me the answer to quit, to tell me to do something, to just tell me to go anywhere but where I was at. And I sat with myself and I was meditating one day, and this was kind of before I don't even know if I knew I had splenic authority at this point, or I even knew what it was, or I knew that this was coming from my spleen. But I heard, wait, something big is coming. So I went into the meditation asking for some guidance, and I heard, wait, something big is coming. And at this point, I was kind of hoping maybe after the wedding, I would like go into car sales or like, you know, go work as a barista, or just like quit my job and I don't know, go, you know, work at Dick's Sporting Goods and sell shoes. Like I was literally asking for anything else. And I heard, wait, something big is coming. And 1 week after our wedding, COVID-19 hit and the pandemic hit. And we were asked to leave the corporate office, and I have been at home ever since. And I, of course, have quit my corporate job since then, but I was able to be home in that corporate job for 1 year after that experience, safe at home, fully supported financially. I was in the healthcare industry. So, you know, they were fully supportive of us being at home, you know, just safe. I was just safe and fully supported by the universe. So that was my first experience with my spleen, saying, wait, something big is coming. I didn't know what was big. I didn't know what that meant, what to do, but that was my spleen speaking to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, you talked about the whisper. I think one of the other things, especially because obviously there's a lot of generator energy around in the world. And when we talk about the sacral, like that's a big feeling. It's big and it's obvious. It's a aha and a and like even if people are mind identified, they can still feel it. Whereas the spleen, it really does, it can be such a quiet whisper, and it gets louder and louder and louder. For those of you who listen all the time, like Jenny Crowder, who does the transits with me, like her spleen literally smacks her around the head. It like screams in her ear now. But it isn't something that is really loud all the time, and really starting to trust it. And I love what you said, because it's this piece that it doesn't give you all the details. It doesn't give you the whys, all the things that the mind wants. And just in that ability to trust, like, wait, something big is coming. That really keeps you in alignment, because ultimately, remember, that's what authority is all about. Between our strategy and our authority, it's about staying in alignment so that we can make the best and correct decisions for ourselves, so that we can create and manifest our dreams into reality. So tell me, learning to build that relationship, and when that whisper sort of started quite quietly, over the time that you've been listening more and more to your authority, excuse me, has it got louder and louder and more obvious to you? Like, do you feel like you can really depend on it now, and you can trust it to turn up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's become, I like that you said, it our authority aligns us to what's correct for us. And I think what I've begun to learn, and it's proven to me, is that I have to remember that our mind is here to keep us safe, but my spleen, my best friend, my spleen, it's almost like an identity of its own. Like it's funny, even when Nick and I, my husband and I, are out and about, and I mean, even in the day to day. So, like, those are big things, I trust it with big things, and it gives me those messages. It gives me, true phrases and messages with big things in my life. And I can really tap in that sense. When it comes to big life decisions, when we're really tapping into our authority. But it shows up for me on the day to day. Like, for example, just the other day, I was driving and I was in a construction zone. I didn't know I was in a construction zone, but I'm driving and there was a giant line of cars in the right lane. And I, for some reason, went in the right lane. And I'm like, why did I do that? I was like, I felt myself. I'm like, I need to go in the right lane. Went there. And then I was mad. I'm like, why am I in this lane? And all these cars are flying by me in the left lane. And I'm like, I want to get in that lane. And so I get in the left lane. Then I get in that lane and I realized it was a construction zone, and like just little things in the day to day. And then I had to get back in the right lane. And those are little moments now too, where I'm like, I will laugh. And I now joke that like my spleen is like sarcastic and like witty, and I'll laugh at it now too. And even my husband, when we're in the car, another example is I'll even use it with him. Like, there was a storm the other night, and I called him and I'm like, hey, don't take this road home. I don't know why, but my spleen said don't take it home. He'll test me, and he calls me back an hour later and he's like, well, I took it home just because I wanted to see, and I'm going to be 10 minutes late because I had to turn around because there was a tree down. So in the day to day, it even kind of takes care of me, and has proven that, the mind is here to keep us safe, but like our authority is here to give us our absolute best life. So yeah, it
Yeah.
has become just a trust muscle that I've built and experimented with. It's an experiment.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, all of human design is an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you say. Like, this is, and we've just had this same experience. I was just saying before I hit record, like, we've just traveled 1,000 kilometers in less than 24 hours. Like, it's been really
Impressive.
intense. And it was really interesting, because when we chose to drive into this particular place, a couple of days ago, like, as we started driving in, both like my emotional authority and my sacral, I'm like, this doesn't feel right. And I've looked at him and he's like, it's a no from me. And that's how his spleen is really like, boom. And both of us talked ourselves into it. So we're like, oh, it's a World Heritage Site, we should so do this. And we did it. And it was like we got about 10 minutes of
Yeah.
amazingness, but the rest of it was awful.
Yep.
And this is the thing, like we often think about our authorities as like the big pieces, the big decisions, like we have to listen to it because something really bad could happen. But it's not just that. It's like, just pay attention, because it really wants to guide you. It wants to guide you to flow, to ease, to letting go of resistance, to all of these things. But letting our minds jump in and override it. You know, we were having a giggle on the way back out because Justin just looked at me and said, my spleen knew it. It freaking knew it.
Yeah.
And this is the piece, right? So tell me, with the way your spleen speaks to you, because this is one of the things as well, like for Justin, for example, he's a splenic projector as well, and he's got the 2838. So he's the energy that's going to it is individualistic, which means that his spleen is very knowing oriented. He just knows. It's not necessarily something he sees in his mind or hears in his mind. And depending on which gates you have, you've probably got different ways that your spleen speaks to you. But how specifically does your spleen speak to you?
It's the knowing as well. Yeah, it's that inner knowing. And that's something too that as I reflected back on my life, there were things I just knew to be true about myself and my life that I knew that were going to become true about my life and just did. And even now it's kind of cool to think that there are things I know that are going to just be true. Like when Nick and I, it's not even like manifesting. It's just like, I'll look at Nick and be like, I know this is going to happen for us. And I know that's coming from my spleen. It's just, It is a knowing. It's not a seeing. It's not a hearing. It's definitely an absolute knowing. And it's funny. I know you speak to, and you've spoken about like a sensation. And I kind of spoke about this earlier, it's like a dipping in, and that helps me get out of my mind. Like if I'm, we're trying to decide where to go, or I'm feeling overwhelmed by something, and, I'm doing the anxiety, or I'm caught up in the moment, I'll pause and be like, wait, let me ask my spleen, like, let me dip in, like, hold on. And I actually like kind of feel it. I feel the knowing in like my lower left side. Like I feel the knowing in my body, in my lower left side. And I think that's funny, because I think your spleen is actually in your right side, if that's true.
So. Yeah.
And I've like double checked that like 3 times, because I'm like, my mind actually wants to be like, no, your spleen's on the right. And I think that's funny too, that like my mind wants to be like, no, the knowing should be on the right side. And I'm like, no, it's on the left.
Yeah.
No, it's on the left. Like, how funny is that? Like, even my mind wants to prove that wrong.
Exactly. And that you've just nailed it. Like your mind wants to prove that wrong. Like we talk about these authorities, but they're not like this small little piece of meat that sits in our body.
Mm-hmm.
They're an energy that radiates within our huge aura that is communicating to an even bigger universe. So absolutely. And I love that you've identified that the minds were like, this is exactly how it is. And it's really interesting. Again, one thing for everybody listening, I want you to understand that I want you to know what's true for you. We all experience our authorities. We all experience our gates, our energies differently. Although we have common themes, we are going to express them differently. And we're not always going to express them the same way. We're going to express them in lower expressions, higher expressions, and somewhere in between. But so getting back to the spleen, one of the things as well that's really important with splenic authority is it very much is rooted in survival. When we talk about some of the other authorities like emotional authority, obviously this is rooted in emotion. It's rooted in feeling your way through life. The sacral, we're really talking about that in the moment knowing, correct, yes, no, yes, no. When we talk about the spleen, it's highly connected to, and the sacral is really connected to energy. Like I have the energy for this and I don't. When we talk about the spleen, what we're talking about is this survival instinct. It's this ability to stay healthy, to be well, to understand fear. Like there is a depth of, one thing I've learnt probably over the last few months, I've been talking to so many people with defined spleens. So not necessarily splenic authority, but defined spleens. And the thing that they have in common is that these people, it's not that they're not afraid, but they have a really good relationship with fear. They tend to be people that are like, I don't know why, but I like adrenaline sports, or I like to get out of my comfort zone, or I just like to do things that are a little bit challenging. And I feel like that is a lot to do with that, because the energy is consistent and reliable and it's there for them all the time. It's like you said, they have this ability to sort of build a relationship with fear. So it's not that they're not afraid. It's just that they, for me on the outside, who has an undefined spleen, it looks like they just, and even my husband's the same, Justin's the same, is they just seem to have a better quality relationship with fear. So can you talk a little bit to, that the spleen is really guiding you from a place of survival, instinct, evolution, and that relationship with fear? Like, how does it guide you and navigate you through fear?
Yeah, for sure. So I think this comes into play a lot for me personally, because I would say, and it's funny because I'm coming off of my trip where I just had an experience, and I'm going to use this personally for those of you listening. I have a terrible fear of flying. Not anymore though, because I actually worked through that. That was actually just some subconscious beliefs that had developed in my earlier years that I worked through. So it's funny you're kind of asking about fear and adrenaline, and kind of the splenic authority and the splenic center. But what's kind of coming to me versus adrenaline and that fear, and my concept and my thought process around that type of fear, what's coming up for me instead is how fear and how the spleen and my splenic authority has supported me with fear is my experience with transitioning my identity in this lifetime. Because that has kind of been, I would say, my biggest fear. Although I've had a terrible fear of flying and I kind of had to move through that. That was just like a phobia, and that has kind of been like a small piece of my life. I would say my biggest fear has been moving through this like very intense and kind of thought out plan for my life of, going to school, having this corporate plan laid out for me, getting married, having kids, having the house, and kind of having this cookie cutter, perfect life. And then being like, holy shit, this isn't for me. I mean, some parts are for me, but feeling like this isn't for me. And there's a lot of parts of this identity that are just like not in my puzzle pieces aren't matching here. And having to move through that fear of like totally just shaking that shit up, and my spleen and my splenic authority having to support me through just shifting and taking like a right turn through that. So I think like the spleen has really guided me through telling me what is safe and not safe for me over the last 2 years to kind of move through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes loads of sense. And I love that. It's that, like, as you were speaking, for me, it was kind of like the resourceful fear almost, because the fear that the mind creates all these stories. It's limiting. It, makes things worse than it really needs to be. Whereas, just talking to you today, the way it feels is that the spleen is like, all right, babes, I've got you. We've got to do this. We're moving through the fear, and I'm going to take you the best way through. So if you listen to me, we can go through our own very unique path, but we're going to get there pretty easily and effortlessly. But if you resist me and you go into the mind, that's when it's going to get bumpy. Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. And even just like my spleen guiding me through kind of a very fast-paced experience of healing, like a lot of shit in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
I would say too, like just in the last 6 months, I've done a lot of deep shadow work, a lot of deep inner child healing. I'm kind of not saying that it's anywhere near done, but I've quit my corporate job, and I've kind of been spending a lot of time at home, running my business and spending a lot of time alone. And I've kind of had my spleen, my friend here with me, guiding me through that, so it's a different type of adrenaline, a different type of, fear of kind of just going into the depths of myself and healing that, so that's kind of what's coming up for me in terms of that safety net and that safe space and my authority kind of taking me there and making sure that it was, the right places to go and giving me the best outcome. Yeah.
I love it. So plain story aside, because I'm like, dude, I need to know that story, but let's just stay focused on authority, and we'll have that conversation later. Although I'm sure half the listeners are like, tell me. What would you say to someone in a relationship with a splenic authority? I know, as being someone who's in a relationship with a splenic authority, at first I was like, you don't know, because he would just say random things, like he just knew this stuff. And one thing that I have learned is to, like, I will literally override my ego sometimes and go, listen to your projector, listen to your splenic projector, just because your mind thinks it knows something better. So what advice would you give to someone who's in a relationship with a splenic authority?
Yeah, I would say don't ask for an explanation, at least right away, because like I don't have it. They don't have it. We don't have it. Because like, for example, I spoke about this on the last episode, but like when we were buying a house, I had the date July 15th and my husband's like, well, what's July 15th? Are we going to have the house? Is it going to be on the market? Are we moving in? I'm like, I don't know, just July 15th. Like the phrases come in. Even we were just in Colorado and we were hiking and this is a little bit of an adrenaline, like safety kind of thing that came through. We were at the end of the hike. I was flipping exhausted at this point. And I happened to get a hit from my spleen. And I'm like, Nick, I think there's a bear over there, like off in the distance. And it was sitting still. And Nick still is doubting me and questioning me. But he looks and he's like, yeah, it kind of looks like a bear. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's a bear. We should just go. And he's like, I don't know. And he's like starting to he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, we're walking. And I didn't have any fear. I didn't ask any questions. I'm like, there's a bear. Let's book it, And he was like, well, how do you know he's asking all these questions. And I'm like, just walk. And I said, and then like later on in the hike, I'm like, Nick, and then I started to get some more clarity, and I do sometimes get a little bit more evidence from my spleen, but because I feel like I have more I have experimented more and I have more trust in my spleen. But I said, Nick, this is how I was able to tell that this was my spleen and not my ego, was that I started to challenge my spleen and I was like, or is it a wolf? And when I was like asking, is it a wolf or a coyote? I started to panic. Like I felt my heart start racing when I was like, oh my God, it's a coyote. And I started like getting nervous when I started asking those questions. But when I thought it was a bear, I was just like, we must leave. So I could tell kind of the way my body was responding when my spleen was like, it's a bear, we must leave. And so like, those are kind of the things where, back to your original question, like if you're in a relationship with somebody and they say an outlandish thing like there's a bear to our left, let's walk, just trust them and ask questions maybe later.
I love that. I've just got head to toe goosebumps again. And I think this is one thing that's really come to mind, and this is for all of you out there listening, that one thing that I see Justin do all the time is that he will give us his guidance and then do what you've just talked about, go straight to the mind to justify or whatever. And, it's definitely something, I mean, I say to him all the time, like, nah, like if that's what you say, that's what you say, let's just do it. I'll listen, we're doing it. But he's so heavily conditioned to have to justify and defend himself. So there's probably so many of you out there that do exactly what Jenna's talking about. So you come from the body, like being embodied in your authority gives you guidance. The spleen says there's a bear. And then you go to the mind, like, oh, how would I know that? I don't know that. Or maybe it's something else. And what I love that you noticed, or what you identified, is that what we're talking about is the shift from the physical body, and what I was talking about before, the resourceful fear. So, it wasn't a oh my God, I need to run screaming from the room, all these terrible things are going to happen. It was just for my health and well-being, we must walk very quickly in the opposite direction. And then the moment it went to the mind, the ego jumps in. So the stories start to be created. And then all of a sudden the flight fight response starts to happen. So I think that is such a beautiful way to really listen to and align to your spleen as well. And just trust, I've really learned to trust the randomness of the things that come out of Justin's mouth. Just trust it.
Yeah.
And I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I should add too that Nick is a manifester. So we're still having fun with our two energies and figuring out when we challenge each other and when we don't, because sometimes he's leading, sometimes I'm guiding. And so we're still figuring out when we kind of take turns doing that. Because sometimes he likes to be like, nah, the bear didn't move its head. It's not a bear.
Tell me about it.
And I'm like, it's a damn bear.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Being a manifesting generator that has a direct connection to the throat. So a lot of manifestor in me with a projector. But this is part of it. We have to learn to put our egos in our back pocket and just be like, well, I'm just going to say it. There's a bear over there. I'm out. But sweet, you do whatever you like. You're a manifestor. You know what you're doing. I'm out. I love it. I love it. So tell me, what would your advice be from your perspective as a kid, when you're a kid? What do you think parents need to know about their kids if they have splenic authority?
Yeah. So I think I want to first say that I feel like as a collective, we're moving in such the right direction. So I just feel like that needs acknowledgement first. Because just as a whole, for any child type authority, energy design, just this recognition of their human design as a whole is good enough. You know what I mean? So 100%. I just feel like the fact that you're listening to this is I'm clapping. And sorry if that was loud in your ear.
No, it's all good.
But for, I would say, so for all kids, I would say encouraging their, recognizing their intuition and encouraging, nurturing their intuition for any child type authority design is amazing. And nurturing their intuition. But I would say for a splenic authority, nurturing their intuition is key. And just really refraining from allowing them to say, I don't know. If a child's like, I don't know, saying, but you do know, or what if you did know? And kind of pushing back on that. But what if you did know? Or if they're feeling frustrated or insecure or, overwhelmed, because obviously a child can be overwhelmed by the energies or, overwhelmed by their surroundings or the environment and the atmosphere around them, saying, trying to create that almost archetype of their spleen, kind of like I spoke earlier, that my spleen is my friend. It's I even sometimes say Nick, let's ask my spleeny weenie. I literally joke about this thing and saying, what does your spleen say? Or, ask your spleen, what does your spleen say? And kind of boosting that confidence that they have a spleen there that gives them the answers and that gives them that confidence and that support versus kind of throwing the answers at them.
Yeah, I love that. One of the really big things to understand is that if we've got someone with splenic authority, they're not a generator. Okay. So these are kids that want to be supported by open-ended questions. They want to be encouraged to talk it out. They want to be, and I think with the spleen and what you're saying and what comes to mind is that allowing these children, they're almost like I know for me, I've got two sacral kids. So, but I even do this with the sacral, don't try to make meaning or sense out of it first. What is it telling you? Just tell me what it's telling you. And go from there. And kids, the thing is that when we're kids, we're so tapped in, and the spleen is probably telling them that there's, some magical fairy in the garden. And it's only adults that say, oh, no, there isn't. And as long as they stay tapped into the magical fairy in the garden, the spleen is louder than the ego. But the moment that we're told that all of that's just in our imagination, like I remember that as a kid, like, oh, it's just in your imagination. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's all real. But anywho,
Yeah.
it took me a long time to go, oh, actually, it is all real shit. But I love that, like give these kids the opportunity to stay in the wonderment of the spleen, because the other gift the spleen has is that the more you trust it, the bigger the muscle you build. What it really supports us to do, or supports you to do, is to do massive quantum leaping. Because if you learn to trust your spleen, it's already nonsensical. It's not going to tell you the action plan and the how-to steps. Never. That's not how the spleen turns up. It's going to tell you pieces or fragments or whatever. But if you learn to just trust it, it can take you so far, because the mind's not getting involved. It's like it'll skip over all the how-to steps that the brain thinks you need, and it'll take you to the fastest place, because ultimately the spleen is all about health, well-being, and mitigating fear. It wants you to be fearless. So really learning to trust it the way it turns up for you, whether it's you hear it, you see it, you feel it, you know it, whatever it is, even a taste. Like people with splenic can have taste that guides them as well. So just listening to it and being able to allow it to guide you, even though the mind is going to go, what? That doesn't make sense. It's not meant to make sense. It's a whole lot more gifted than making sense, in inverted commas. So what advice would you give human design guides or coaches or anyone working with people with splenic authority? What advice would you give to coach these people?
Yeah, so I would probably say the first thing I would encourage them to ask their clients is just, what have you always known? That was the first thing that I reflected on, is just, what did I always know? What did I always know about myself? And what did I always know to be true? What did I know? What was that knowing that I always had? And I know that's personal to me and kind of my design and how it showed up for me, but that's like a beautiful starting point to just kind of say, like, what did you know to be true about yourself? And what did that feel like when you knew that? When did it happen? How did it feel in your body? How did that knowing show up for you? And if they have resistance there, if the client or, the friend, the family member, whoever they're really working with is what, I don't know, or they're hesitating. It's, well, if you did know something, how would you want that to feel?
So as you were speaking, the question that really came to mind for me that we could be asking our clients with splenic authority to help them connect to it is like, when was the last time you felt fully guided? When was the last time that you felt fully supported? And that's a feeling in your body. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And how did it feel in your body? What was that sensory feeling? How did it feel in the energy around you? How did your spirit connect with you? Yeah. And for me, how that kind of shows up is, it really is peace. And I think I spoke about this with you previously, but it really comes through for me as a knowing of, like, when I'm with Nick or when I'm with my loved ones, it's a very grounded feeling. When I'm in Mother Nature or when I'm with my loved one, it's a very grounded feeling. And it's kind of that feeling that I spoke about when I dip into my spleen. It's a very grounded dipping in feeling. So really asking them, when was the last time you had that feeling, and what was that knowing that you had? And kind of asking them to kind of reflect on their life and what was it that you knew? And, if they have that resistance, and if they have any resistance, well, I don't know, or I'm not sure, if they have resistance around, having that knowing, I would then go into kind of that that doubt and that shame and that shadow work next, and kind of guide them there.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so, so important. And especially because we're not taught to trust the spleen. We're not taught to trust these feelings or these visions or these voices or whatever it is that comes in for us. And, you know, you don't need to have splenic authority to have intuition or any of the clairs. Like, it's different for everybody. But everybody has some sort of gift. But the thing with the splenic authority is that the way you experience it is consistent and reliable. Every single time you're going to get guided in the same way. So the power of reverse engineering, like, when was the last time I made a really good decision? What guided me there? How did I know that was the right thing for me? Really help you dive into your body and pinpoint what that splenic feeling or guidance feels like. You know, again, Jenny Crowther makes me laugh because, you know, from the moment I met her, she's like, oh no, my spleen's already signed up to the mastermind. Like, I'm already in. It's just my mind that's catching up. It's my mind. And she literally said, when we spoke before it, she's like, I need some questions. My mind needs some questions answered, but my spleen's already signed up. We're in. So the spleen can feel very, and I've heard this from a number of people, like, it's almost ahead of you. So if you can just learn to trust it, well, it's not ahead of you, it's ahead of the mind. So if you can learn to trust it, it means that you can just, you know, get a lot of the resistance out of the way. Because remember, resistance is something that we're holding on to that's stopping us from being in flow. So if we can trust our authority and keep trusting our authority, that's why the conditioning falls away, because we're changing behavior through trusting our physical body as opposed to the stories that we're telling ourselves. So yeah, I love that. Awesome. So is there anything else that you think people that have just come to human design, they've discovered that their authority is splenic authority, what else do you think they really need to know or understand? What would your advice be?
I would just say, don't be intimidated by it. I feel like that was maybe my instinct, my ego's instinct. When you hear, I mean, I know I would say maybe emotional authority is the other intimidating one, because it's like, what? I have to wait. You know, that's, you know, my clients also feel intimidated by the emotional wave. But I think, you know, a lot of my clients also feel intimidated by splenic authority, because it's like, where is it? Does it talk to me? You know, what does it sound like? You know, there's a lot of questions around the splenic authority. But I would say the more you can have fun with it and even maybe characterize it. And I think, like, kind of circling back to the beginning of this discussion, when you said art, it's an art form. The more you can have fun with your splenic authority and personalize it and give it a personality, and just really listen to it like it is a friend looking out for you, like it is a friend totally guiding you to your best life, I feel like the louder it's going to get and the easier it's going to get for you to just begin listening to it and hear it more often and tap into it more quickly and more often. So yeah, I would just say have fun with it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And one of the things that I do want to say is I think this is the same for all authorities. Like, lighten up, have fun. All authorities are challenged. Everyone comes to me and says, yeah, but mine's not working, or I can't hear it, or I need to build a better relationship, or I need to do it more. Nah, it's always working. It's always happening. It's more a process of letting go of the mind, the stories, the decision making from the mind, and just allowing your authority to show through. And the more lightness and playfulness we can have with it, the more faster the transition, the faster the changing habit, making body decisions as opposed to mind decisions will happen. Well, thank you, my dear friend, Jenna Rossi. It's so lovely to have you here. So thanks for joining and telling us all about your splenic authority.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Thank you, everyone, for joining and continuing to be with us on this authority series as we go through it. We've still got a few to go. We've got the less common authorities to go, so hang in there. And thank you, everyone, for joining so much. And I look forward to having you on the next podcast. Bye for now.